Hey guys, I'm Chris.
And I'm Mike.
And welcome back to this week's No Limits after a long hiatus, the Mitch Rapp podcast. How you doing this week, Mike?
Oh, dude, it feels so good hearing you say the Mitch Rapp podcast. Almost as good as cracking into a new Mitch Rapp book. We are here to talk about Capture or Kill, the first Mitch Rapp book written by Don Bentley. Wow, do we have a lot to talk about.
Dude, I know. It's crazy to think that we're recording. I did the math the other day. I'm forgetting already. I should have written it down, but we're in our like 500th episode range between the three different feeds. And to think
Crazy.
that we started with, one author focusing one book a month,
Right.
to look back on that. And now sometimes we're recording anywhere from 3 to 5 books a month. And it's just like, I've said this before, but I'll say it again. It's like, getting a warm blanket, coming back to these authors that we covered truly, like we just did with Brad Thor and Shadow of Doubt. Hope you guys have checked that out on the No Limits Scott Harvath podcast. And now getting a new Vince Flynn novel written by a new author, Don Bentley, Capture or Kill. Really excited to talk to you about this, mainly because there's just so much going on. It's like, not only do we get this book written by a new author in the series, I want to talk to you, how is he compared to Kyle? How is he compared to Vince? But we also get the caveat that this is like a semi prequel in the sense that, he's gone back placed his story between two novels. The last time we were on this feed, we revisited these two novels to get ready for this. So there's that aspect. And then additionally, you add in this, I don't know what to call it, but like alternative history with the Bin Laden stuff, like implementing like real world event. I mean, I know like all these stories have put real world events in before. Mitch's origin story is based upon a real event with
this
the
is different.
This is different because we're like actually there. We're
changing
to the time
it a little
period. Bit. Exactly. So a lot of things I want to talk to you about. Where do you want to start though, Mike?
Whoa, you're right, dude. I mean, all these things we got to cover. But your point about this, it feels like we're coming home. When we get a new Mitch Rapp book, it's coming home. We're hitting our comfort zone where I'm living for the moment right now. So much going on in both our lives. You with work, me with the baby on the way. Well, I guess we've announced that on the other podcast, but not to the Mitch Rapp fans. So the Mitch Rapp pod listeners, the originals who've been with us, there's yet another podcast baby coming. And it's on my side this time.
Yes, Chris, not my side.
You had what, 3 while we've been doing this podcast? No, 2 while we've been doing this podcast, I think. 2020.
March of 2020. Yeah. I had already had Mary and Patrick. Yeah.
So this is the 3rd podcast, baby. And in fact, the due date, who knows if we'll make it there, is September 3rd. The publication date of Capture or Kill. Yeah. So we might have a Mitch Rapp baby coming on publication day or earlier. Some signs are pointing to that, but it feels like we're coming home with this book. And with the transition, there's a lot of things going on. Who knows behind the scenes? We're not privy to a lot of that. The social media has really made a big push. I think Don Bentley or Vince Flynn, as you should say, Vince Flynn was trending on Twitter when the transition was first announced and that the new book is going to be written by someone different than Kyle. There's so much buzz around this, and it put me on edge. I was anxious about that. I was anxious about the story going back in time because this is smack in the middle. You might call it the height of Vince. Maybe that like 3/4 point of Vince protect and defend going into The Last Man. I believe we had already covered Memorial Day, Consent to Kill. Those ones came, I think, right before or a few books before Protect and Defend, if I'm not mistaken. So we are hitting like peak Vince. Like he's already mastered the craft Vince. And he's writing some incredible stories. And now Don wants to put his first book right smack in the middle of that. And Before the Last Man, this actually comes towards the end then. We're right before The Last Man.
Is his last book, right? So
it's his last book. It's his swan song. It was such a meaningful book. This was a risk. It was an absolute risk, messing with the timeline a little bit, going to fill in a gap. And like you said, this quasi-alternate history of the Bin Laden raid, I had so many questions, concerns. I was anxious about this book. Chris, after reading the first half, and folks, we are only spoiling the first half, up to chapter 45.
Yep.
We read chapters 1 through 44, so we will not be spoiling anything after page 212 today.
Yeah, 212, yeah.
These first 200 or so pages are making the case that this book is in the top 10. That's my
No way.
Yeah, no, I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. My hot take is I love this book, and if things keep up, it has a chance at the top 10. No doubt.
Wow. Wow.
That's big. Wow. That's a big statement coming from me.
You know, I had my trepidations about this book because, you know, all the things we've listed, you know, just new writer, decision to do this versus, you know, just continuing after the last story. Worried, and more so I was worried that why would you pick to go back in time instead of just continuing on? And I guess the quick answer is like, oh, I want to go back in time so that way I can sort of mold how I want actually Rapp to go into the future. You know, I'm thinking big. I want to change. But I believe we mentioned it on one of our pods that this might be a good opportunity for Don. Like, you know, it might not actually be a bad thing that he decided to do this because, one, it literally gives him an opportunity to fit his book in between two Vince's books instead of having to follow both Vince and Kyle.
Right. And navigate both their different styles and voices.
Exactly. And to cement himself, you know, to try to like understand who Rapp is, what this character is, and only having to navigate like sort of one author's take, you know, coming right after two different books. And, you know, the stakes of, because it's in between two books, the stakes of this book don't have to be like crazy high or have to be crazy memorable in the sense that if they're never mentioned again, you know, the whole story going forward, the next 7 to 10 books don't fall apart because of it.
Right.
You know, not to say that like Bin Laden and like what the first half of this book isn't important stuff, but what I'm saying is like the fact that it wouldn't like have gotten broadened up or like you don't have plot holes going forward, it's perfectly fine. So
yeah,
and like you, we got this book really far in advance,
and I sat on it though. I wasn't ready.
The same thing. I
wasn't ready.
I left it on my side table because I don't know. I didn't want to read it. I mean, I wanted to read it, but I wasn't ready to read it.
I hear you. It was tough. It was like a dilemma. It was like a paradox.
Yeah.
I wanted to, but something was just telling me, hey, wait a little bit longer. Wait a little bit. I'm not sure.
I know. So then we came up with all these concoctions. Like we flash read all of TJ Newman's book before this one. We obviously covered a bunch of Brad stuff.
A lot of Brad stuff, yeah.
But, you know, time crunch. We are getting this in. We need to get these recordings in before you and your lovely wife go to give birth to the third podcast baby. So we're sitting down now. This is August, the little peek behind the curtains here. August 21st, we're recording part 1 well before the pub date.
Yeah, over a week, 2 weeks almost. Yeah.
And I have to say, I love it.
Yeah. There's no other way to put it besides
I love this book.
It's amazing.
So I'll have to say, I have not read past page 212. So the second half could change. And we'll cover that in part 2. But at least the first 45 chapters are very good. Now, saying that is very different than Vince.
Yes. So this is where I actually
there's differences, but there's similarities. Like
there's similarities too.
I could tell it was a different author. I could tell it's definitely but it's way more different than Kyle than it is different from Vince.
100%. It's more different than Kyle then it's different from Vince. And to guide this conversation, I wanted to try to put this into two buckets: the content bucket and the style bucket.
Yes.
And I think if we look at those two things separately, we can do some really interesting analysis. For example, I'm reading the book and I feel 100% this is a Vince Flynn story.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
The plot, the motivations, the characters, the settings, the decision making. I think everything driving the plot is pure Vince Flynn through and through. I think Don has that analytical mind. I think he's in touch with politics, with military, with global affairs, with terrorism. And I think he really has channeled the storytelling that Vince had. Style is where I see a bit of a gap. And this is not a negative. I don't say a gap in a bad way, but a few things were a little stark in the writing style. One is something around the dialogue. And I'm wondering if I'm crazy or maybe misremembering. Don really breaks up a scene that has dialogue, and in between almost every speaker's words, he puts like a few paragraphs of background or discussion or context. And then he'll come back to the conversation. So like character A will say something. Character B might not respond until 5-6 paragraphs later.
Right.
And so
yeah,
that conversation,
I did notice that.
The conversation feels really, really long, but not a lot of words are being said between the people. And what's cool is we're getting the texture of the setting, the texture of who these people are, the background of why they're doing what they're doing. But the conversation isn't flowing that well, where I feel like when Vince wrote dialogue, it was snappy. It was quick. Those characters said what they needed to say, responded to one another, and you didn't have a lot of Rapp said, Irene said, Scott responded, Mitch jumped in and said, then he said, and it kind of flowed. I feel like the dialogue here gets a little choppy. I've yet to determine if that's a problem, and the reason I don't think it is because the gold that's between those lines. There's like, let's say the phone calls when Mitch is on the ground. I guess now we're getting into the spoiler territory of it all. When Mitch is undercover, originally as the French businessman, and he's supposed to be taking out Fairbanks, a terrorist financier. And then he gets approached by Roy Hinton, another guy, an Iranian, high up in the Quds Force. And he sits down with him and he gives him a proposition. And we thought his cover's blown. He's like, I know who you really are. But he calls him Farid Saeed. So Rapp is under like 3 different covers here all at once. His French cover is blown for this one assassination attempt. But he's really playing the Iranians who thinks he's Farid Saeed, an Iraqi kind of arms dealer. He's a broker of these different terrorist groups and their business.
A warlord.
Dealings. He's a warlord. Yeah. And it's really cool. He's got all these personas going on. And so by having in between the dialogue descriptions of this, it makes the story richer. It really fleshes it out. But at some points I was like, I kind of want the characters just to talk. Because when Vince wrote characters talking, it felt so authentic and real, like a conversation you were there for. Where here, I feel like an outsider on all the conversations because it's really chopped up and fleshed out with all these descriptions. So that was just something I noticed.
One of the major things that I noticed in a positive way that was different from Vince is, and maybe it's purely because he was a helicopter pilot, so this
military talk.
This first half of this novel, one, I feel it just has a lot more military aspect to it.
Agreed.
Mitch has always like interacted with the military, and obviously Scott, Navy SEALs, we've had that. I just felt like this was very heavy military, but what we got was very interesting, and I thought it was done well. And obviously, this is one of Don's strong points. And obviously, he's going to bring in helicopters because that's what he's used to. That's what he knows. Yep. And it was awesome. The scene where obviously you mentioned that interaction with Runyon. He mentions, Rapp's thinking that he's going to like blow himself, but he actually, he thinks that he's this other guy, but he gets that information from Ashani, who actually knows that Rapp is using this alias.
Ashani's setting it up.
But he's actually trying to get to Rapp because he needs to talk to Rapp.
Yeah.
it's kind of like 3D chess. Like
it's
trying
absolutely 3D chess.
Putting
it's
it all together.
Vince could have in his mind. Yeah.
Yes, but then he's like, "Oh, you want to know this information?" And obviously, this op gone bad. We get all the cool like helicopter talk, interaction with the various Army Rangers. Even we throw in like some Marines that are on like loan or the I don't know. I forget the name, but like a study abroad with the Rangers, like
Doug Peluso
type deal on loan. Like that was kind of cool. But yeah, like I definitely could sense, one, this is Don's strong point, and two, it just that part felt a little different from Vince. But I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm saying I could just tell it was different. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. That was going to be one of my other content points. Not content of the plotting, which I think is very much Vince Flynn style. It might be Don Bentley upping the content a bit to be more military focused. It might be an improvement on the series based on his background that Vince didn't have. This intimate knowledge and firsthand experience of whether you're on the radio in a combat zone or whether you're having to coordinate between the different branches. The artillery that you're going to need to come in and the guys on the ground. And some of the banter, I think Don has done a really good job, particularly when Coleman, Wicker, Maz, and the boys get together. The gallows humor kind of continues, and it has this edge of ribbing about Army Rangers versus SEALs, and where we ended up when our guy who's taken, the Army Ranger who's taken, gets rescued by Coleman out of the water and rescued by Rapp in the first place.
The Army Ranger who can't swim, by the way.
That was a bit strange. We're going to have to get there. But yeah, just the fact that they're ribbing each other about, saved by a SEAL. And Scott Coleman's like, yeah, even Rangers need SEALs to come in and be their heroes for them. That ribbing I expected from Don. If you read any of his earlier works, his Matt Drake works, his Clancy works.
Oh, yeah.
You knew you were going to get that. And I think it helps the series. I think it jazzes it up.
Well, and that's in a line with what Vince did, what Kyle, I think, elevated, and now Don has taken his own spin on that,
And the radio chatter. The radio chatter seems very authentic to a war zone where Vince or Kyle wouldn't do that.
Exactly. That kind of military operational aspects of the story, when either Rapp is there or not there, is something that we rarely, if ever, got.
Yeah.
The other thing, I don't know, you can tell me this is like a nitpick minutia, but so the only reason why I can justify why it was there is because it is this novel placed in between two other novels. But we've talked a lot about how Vince's strength was characters and how he could craft the backstory for a character that was literally going to die on the next page. But you could, you knew his name, you knew his whole life story. What was with not naming people? Like, we're getting Fairbanks and we're getting
Cyclone,
and
a little too heavy-handed.
Even like the
use of those,
the CIA people with the station chiefs,
Dan and Steve.
We get Bill and Steve,
yeah.
But Vince would always give us their full name.
Yeah, I thought both of those things really stood out to me. You're right.
Did it? And it's just because maybe I'm a quote unquote I'm no Ryan Steck, but I'd like to think, I love Ryan Steck. I love the work he does. He's the
real book spy. Yeah,
he's the real book spy. He's the rapologist. I like to say that we're pretty good second tier rapologists, considering
we know Rapp, we know the series, we know the style, we know what should and should not be in this line of books. And that felt a little heavy-handed, using the call signs or the code names, but that goes hand in hand with the operational know-how. Like, you most likely are using those code names that often on the ground during an op when you're seeking out a high-value target. Like, those code names are front and center. So, like, you go look at one page and 6 or 7 times the name Cyclone in all caps.
Right. Why was it in all caps?
It looks weird. Again, that's probably how these code names are, but it just looks funny on the page and like a visual aesthetic point. If you just open the book randomly, every page is going to have a bunch of names in all caps. But again, it kind of works with the operation because these high value targets are going to have those code names. And ultimately, I'm guessing this leads to a Geronimo moment. Like, we're going to have Geronimo mentioned when we get to the Bin Laden stuff, which hasn't really come up yet. I do want to talk about that. But your other point on the CIA guys, I kind of appreciated that because you go to, like, let's say, I think they're at Jalalabad in the airbase, and there's a special tent set up where, you know, the secret squirrel guys are doing the secret squirrel stuff. And it's like they're not using last names, and these probably aren't their real names. And a couple of the military guys who are brought in don't know their real names. And it just feels kind of strange in a way that makes me believe the CIA is trying to be a little dodgy, secretive here, protecting identities and whatnot. So I kind of thought that was like mysterious and a nice little hook. But eventually I'm like, is it too much of it? Just like the code names, is it too much of it? It's a little heavy-handed. And then similarly, it's not something Vince would have done. So Are we straying a little too far from the path?
So the only thing that like rubs me wrong about that is the fact that The Last Man takes place in
right after
Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Right after this. And so we get the J-Bod station chief he's in cahoots with Rick and he gets killed.
Right.
So, and his name's not Steve, right?
Is there a missing link?
Yeah, like, so I just don't understand that aspect. I mean, I guess there could be, you know, he could have been fired or replaced, you know, so.
I think you bring up a bigger point of we'll have to do this either during part 2 or maybe a little special episode after part 2, but we're going to have to talk about the canon, right? Does this book do enough to slot into the canon and not break rules? And I'm waiting to pass judgment on that because so far I think this book really brought us out very well.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
Not knowing how it ends, I don't know how it brings us into The Last Man. So that's something we're going to have to talk about. And I didn't notice it, but that would be a big one. If there's like a different station chief and we never get any reconciliation over why there was turnover.
Because I just remember Darren Sickles is the station chief of Kabul.
I remember him.
And, you know, like, all right, I'm being like a little Mitch Rapp bitch, you know, like I understand, maybe I'm being like that, but you know, I'm not going to be the only one that realizes that, you know, Darren Sickles played a huge part in the fact that he was in this inept person in charge of Kabul in station. And then they were having all of these problems with, you know, Rickman. So I don't know that maybe just because I'm so into this series and I know it like the back of my, I don't know like the back of my hand, but I know a lot of it like the back of my hand. You know, stuff like that just drives me a little bit crazy.
No,
is that weird?
But let's not draw that conclusion on half the book. That's why I'm saying let's do this.
Yeah, very true.
Post-mortem at the end, because it may all check out, or this book might not even bring us right up to The Last Man in terms of dates. Maybe there's an even bigger gap. Maybe Don's second book is a sequel to this that's still in this time period. Like we just don't know those things yet, not having finished the book.
Yeah, true. So, very true.
I'm open to that. But another thing I'd like to connect is, okay, where is Joe Rickman? If that's not mentioned by the end of this book, a little concerned.
Because we're in Afghanistan.
He runs everything in Afghanistan. He's essentially like what Farid Said wants to be, this know-it-all, connecting all strings, having, you know, his fingers, his tentacles on everything.
Especially when he like taps all of those assets to pull off that, you know, fake the fake mission.
Yeah.
Like Rickman would have 100% been involved with that because Rickman has all the assets to begin with. So
yeah. Rapp and Kennedy,
that's what
right
doing this kind of
would need him.
Prequel insert thing. Like that's where it gets a little dicey for me. Like if you're not going to hold up to canon. So yeah, I like this idea of maybe doing either having a segment of our next episode devoted to that, or if it, you know, guarantees a whole third episode, we could talk about that. So
we should. There's an opportunity though. You know how Kennedy has the plan as a distraction to let Rapp operate? She's going to send Nash and a delegation of spies. I think that was the quote. And Nash just recruited. There was that one little cutaway scene where he calls.
One little scene.
What was it? Noreen, or what was her name?
Yeah, we've never met her before, but some asset who's about to leave the CIA because of something that happened.
She's looking for an FBI job, it sounds like. Mm-hmm. And she's with her husband, and he kind of is hoping she can take a
Noreen Ahmed was her name.
Noreen Ahmed. But Nash is going to bring her in. So this delegation of spies is going there, and it's really a distraction. You know, everything Rapp is doing in the Spingar Mountains, Nash has to be like the official delegation to draw attention away for all the spies in town, the Iranians who are in town, the Afghanis. It's a perfect opportunity for them to team up with Joe Rickman. Like, Joe Rickman should be advising Nash when he's on the ground, when he arrives.
Yes.
Like, maybe that gets him out of the picture. You just kind of say he's part of that team somewhere else doing something. But I think it really should be mentioned. You're right. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about Nash. What do you think about the choice to bring Nash up in this novel?
Oh, you have to.
Exactly.
Look at everything from Extreme Measures. You can't ignore Nash, and you especially can't ignore his kind of faltering relationship with Kennedy. And I just think the way Nash and Kennedy have that conversation is perfect. That shows somebody who did their homework, someone who was in tune with where Vince was going, because Kennedy is questioning Nash when he knocks on her door and is being very timid about what he can and cannot do, and the office politics of it all and the organizational charts. Like, Nash is transitioning from being an operative like Mitch to being a bureaucrat who has his hands tied with red tape, and he doesn't know how to navigate that. And he didn't even want it. They forced him into it to be this national hero. So I love that Nash is kind of a wuss right now, and Irene sees that he's a wuss, and Irene basically wants to use him as a political pawn instead of actually having involved in the op. I think that's great.
Well, and she even says the quote, I never second guess myself until now.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah,
that was big. I wanted to bring this up because I felt that the placement of Mike Nash and the execution of when he's introduced with Irene in their dialogue 100% confirm what you said. This is a guy who did his research. Obviously, you know, not that I'm going to like say that the authors that take over the series don't read all the novels, but you know, you never know. This is definitely someone who focused on reading all the novels carefully, or at least all the novels with Mike Nash, and all the way up to his betrayal in Enemy at the Gates. And I feel like this just adds to Enemy at the Gates a little bit. You know what I mean?
I agree. That is probably the clearest connection to what Kyle did in the series.
Exactly.
Is what Don's doing here with Mike Nash, which is what Vince started and hinted at. Then Kyle picked up at Enemy at the Gates.
On those
how many
threads
books later? 10 books later, whatever it is. That's the clearest connection to Kyle is the Nash connection, I think.
Yeah, and which so many people claimed, like, oh my God, how could you do that to Mike Nash? Like, that's out of left field. That's so on character. Like, but we've said this time and time again. If you go back and look at Vince's stuff, you will see that he was planning this, whether or not he wanted Mike to, essentially perform treason by proxy on his country, don't know that. But he definitely had something. He purposely put this doubt with Mike Nash between.
He was going off the deep end.
Kennedy and Rapp, and this was something that Kyle latched onto, obviously developed into his own story. So I love the way Don introduced Mike Nash and put him into the story.
I completely agree. And at the same time, he's valuable to Irene because no one knows Rapp better. I would say, personally, maybe there's a few people up there who can give you a psychological profile on him. Scott, Stan. But no one knows him better in terms of operating on the ground in the CIA at this point.
Yeah, true.
I think at this point, Nash knows his patterns of thinking the best. I feel like Coleman has been an assistant and does the dirty work. But Coleman, to this point, never has had to kind of think like Mitch and operate like Mitch. He would always just take the orders and execute them flawlessly.
We've never seen Scott push back.
No, and here he's even actually starting to have to think on his own when he has to rescue Rapp. He makes a couple of calls. Like, Scott Coleman is given a little more agency here in the field. And I really like that. But just to wrap up the Nash stuff, he and Kennedy are talking about trying to predict Rapp's next move. When the op to assassinate Fairbanks gets sidelined. And Cyclone or Roy Inton comes in and says, hey, we're going to blow up this American chopper. Watch it. And he doesn't say that exactly, but watch what happens. And it turns out Roy Inton, the Quds Force, the Iranians are giving the terrorist groups, Al-Qaeda and others, HIG, I think is one of them, the ability to take down choppers at nighttime, which we thought that was impossible. Rapp's got to chase all these leads, but he's lacking communication with Kennedy. So Kennedy needs Nash to predict his next move. And Nash says, it's clear. He's giving up on Fairbanks because he knows right now he's got to track down who is in Afghanistan on behalf of the Iranians, giving them weapons, giving them intel on an American operation that allows them to take down a chopper and kill service members. Nash knows Rapp ain't going to fuck with that. Rapp is going to the source, to JBAD. He's talking to every motherfucker he can. He's asking who they captured on the mission, who their target was, where their intel came from. He's going to track down every lead he can over that. And then that gets him brought into the whole rescue mission for this Sexton guy who was captured, this Army Ranger. It's all kind of connecting. But we're getting lines like this. Sometimes miracles happen, and people survived cancer. No one survived Mitch Rapp.
I love that one. That was a good one.
That's a gem. And then this one. In all these conversations, Irene and Nash trying to figure out Rapp's moves, they're thinking just like him. Rapp's ability to do what others couldn't went beyond just the physical. Yes, the man seemed born to kill terrorists in the same way in which Eddie Van Halen had been born to play guitar, but it went further than that. Rapp possessed the sort of operational sixth sense that was hard to define and impossible to teach. He was more like a coyote who could spot a hunter's trap than a chess master able to foresee an opponent's strategy. Rapp had probably constructed the Saeed identity for a scenario exactly like this one. Her top operative was doing his part to turn the current setback into a win. Irene intended to do the same. And that's the moment where she sends, Mike and Ash out there. They have Rapp's number, and Don is giving new readers clues of who Rapp is. There's even a few other times, I think it happens multiple times, where he says Rapp is not just a cold-blooded killer. And that's exactly what I want people to say. Or I want a new author to say to show that we know Rapp. Here it is. Contrary to popular belief, Rapp did not kill everyone who irritated him. He was fond of telling Irene, he could and did practice restraint when the situation merited it. There's another one where it says Stan Hurley taught him that. I think it's the most important lesson from Stan Hurley. Really want to find this one real quick. You could be an author who takes over the series and goes, I'm going to have an unhinged Mitch Rapp. I think the readers want to go back to the days where he was dark and brooding and did all these crazy things. And he would just murder people with incendiary grenades, stuffed into their mouth, breaking their teeth, and then light their insides on fire and they burn from the inside out. Yes, we want that Mitch Rapp. But you can't have a single-minded, narrow story of Mitch Rapp just being this off-the-hook killer. So Don gets that and wrote, besides teaching Rapp how best to kill a man, perhaps the most important thing Hurley had imparted was when not to kill. Specifically, when to temper the bias for action that ordinarily made Rapp so effective at his job. As Stan was wont to say, he hadn't recruited Rapp to be a suicide bomber. The life of a good guy for the life of a bad guy was never an even trade. And that understanding of Rapp is paying off and allowing Irene and Nash to do their job because they don't know Rapp is going undercover as Farid Saeed. They don't know Rapp is going to pop up in JBAD and want to get involved in this op to track down whoever blew the American chopper. But them understanding who Rapp is gets them to know where he's going to pop up and have Coleman's team in place to meet with him and pull off the op. That wouldn't have happened if we didn't understand Rapp's psyche and persona.
Yeah, and I think the other ways that Don shows this is there's, you're the quotes guy. I'm not the quotes guy, but I'm just going to bastardize it. He says there's this one I don't know, security guard or whatever. And he's like, I'm not just going to kill a guy because he chose the big thing. But, you do make a decision. Essentially like saying like Rapp just doesn't have indiscriminate rule of he kills whoever he sees. He actually like, this guy obviously chose to be the bodyguard of someone who is a bad person. So like if he gets in his way, he's going to have no problems. But like, he's not just going to straight up kill him right away without any sort of pretext. That to me is true to what Vince would say, and even what Kyle would do with Rapp is not that kind of character to just pop up, kill anybody. The one scene that was interesting was when he gets ambushed by those random guys,
the random thugs. Yeah.
Would he have?
They are thugs, and he eventually uses their phone.
Yes.
To contact Kennedy.
Would he have killed those guys? Would Vince have had him kill those guys, or would Vince have just had him incapacitate him?
That was the questionable one. That was the questionable one. He was so hell-bent in that moment of doing two things. One, passing the intel to
just
Kennedy.
Found out the information. Yep.
That an American Special Operations team was going into an ambush. So he was needing to pass on that information. He was also trying to salvage the Fairbanks assassination before he gave up on that, which Nash correctly predicted. He's going to give up on Fairbanks to track this down. He was still thinking maybe I could pull this off. So, that was a strange little move. I don't know. Maybe he could have justified it that they were thugs. They did approach him. And honestly, if he didn't kill him, they were probably going to kill him. So,
very true.
I think that's justified. Yeah. One other signal that Don gets Mitch Rapp, and he throws this to us.
Give it to me.
In the prologue, the Angel of Death.
Ah, yes.
I was bought in. If I had any questions going in, is this going to be the Mitch Rapp I know and love? Did Don do his homework? We know Kyle spent countless hours digging into Vince and trying to figure out every little clue that he needed to pull this off. Don did the same. And it's clear when we get Azad Ashani, we're brought back to Isfahan.
Yeah. But we knew that we were going to get Azad Ashani because it was in the
description. That's the
description.
We knew we were going back to the nuclear site that was bombed or blown up in Protect and Defend by the Israelis, and they were going to try to pin it on the U.S. and use that as a justification, which we still don't know what they have coming. The Quds Force demonstration by the Iranians, it's kind of like murky of what technology or what weapons or what operation they're planning, but we know it's going to hurt the U.S.
Well, I think we know it's like this missile technology because that's what I was. Choppers. Yeah, that prologue was very interesting in the fact that like we're getting all this. The writing in there is interesting because we're getting all these descriptions about what he's watching, but we don't ever actually he doesn't actually ever say it. So I imagine like me, I always think of a visual. I think of like how would this be shown in a TV or a movie. Mm-hmm. So if we were there in the movie, like literally the last scene, we'd be on their faces the whole time. But as we panned away, we would just pan to this. Carnage demonstration of whatever's going on. And to me,
almost like the North Koreans, rolling their nukes through the streets with this massive million-man army. Yeah.
To me, what they were showing was the fact at night they were able to shoot down this helicopter and destroy it. So
I guess that's it. I'm wondering if there's a little more they have planned. That I feel like they're hinting at something bigger.
I hope so.
Definitely.
Yeah,
I hope so too, but definitely that really freaks out Irene and Mitch on their phone call when they kind of like, without saying it, they understand each other, where Irene's like,
oh shit,
they shot down the chopper at night, and Mitch is like, oh shit. And that's a big deal. That's a turning point, but I still think the Iranians have something bigger at stake, and Rapp's going to have to figure it out, with this guy that he's undercover with.
And I'm really intrigued how, because we have this whole inner dialogue with Ashani, and the fact that we know what kind of person he is based off of everything he did to help
Irene.
Irene.
Yeah,
but he still loves his country, and obviously he thinks what's going to happen with his country is wrong, so he wants to try to stop that. So I think like literally the chapter right after we're cutting off, is the chapter. We get more Ashani immediately after this, so we're gonna start covering that in the next part. But
no, that's a huge cliffhanger because I'm while the whole thing is going on in the caves in the Spingar Mountains, in the back of my mind, I'm like, he's got to get to the Ashani meet.
Which is so funny because, like, Irene's with the president, and he doesn't realize that. Oh wait, the video I just saw, that's Rapp.
That's Mitch.
Wait, I thought you said he has to meet with Ashani. Like, oh, he has 7 hours. He'll make it. Like,
yeah,
that was so funny.
That was real interesting. And the president's like, that's him. I thought you said, he was tracing down a lead with a high value target, and Irene's like, that's the one he's carrying on his back. So like, you're letting Mitch carry away a high value target, which we just took down, to take him undercover into a cell, and you're going to have him rescue the Ranger. Oh, and then that leads to an amazing line of how Irene, after being in the Oval Office, was left again. Irene doesn't rattle very easily, but so far she's rattled a few times, rethinking her strategy to out Nash and bring Nash in, rethinking. Whoa, actually, her interaction with Rex, Alton Rex, I think. Yeah, he touches her and she's just shaken to her core.
I think that shows another element of Don doing his homework. She has just had this. She was just taken and brought to the point of, thought she was going to be raped, stripped down to her underwear. Yeah. So placing her in this vulnerable state, that is true and canonical to the story.
Right.
Fully agree with putting that in there. I read that and I was like, oh, I get why he's doing that.
Exactly. And that's the explanation, because I could see some people being like, this is kind of a weakened Irene. She's second guessing herself. She's trembling a little bit. The president even has to ask her, Irene, what's wrong? And she has to steady herself. Like, this is not the Irene, who comes in and kicks ass. But dude, protecting the Fen just happened. You're 100% right. She is vulnerable. But she just blows the president's mind with this intel. And then she says, as the president left the room, Irene found herself wondering how it was that the most powerful nation in the world was yet again placing its fate on the shoulders of just one man.
Every book, man.
That's a Mitch Rapp book. That right there is the essence of a Mitch Rapp book.
Very true.
And it's going to lead to this Ashani conversation, which I think is the turning point. Part 2 is going to open up, I hope, however Rapp transitions, now that he saved the guy, he knows a little bit more about what's going on, he can get back to meet Ashani, and Ashani wants to partner with him. And we know Ashani is bringing in his wife. Ashani says one of the most important parts of the mission will be his wife, and then cliffhanger. We don't know what he asks of her.
Yeah.
But she's going to be involved. Like, there's something coming big that I'm really excited for.
We don't yet know what Mike and this NOC Noreen is going to do.
Right.
We don't know what Rapp's next move is. We don't know what Irene's next move is. And so I guess there's two other things that I really want to talk to you about. I want to talk to you about the action of the first half and like what you thought of the operation, once Mitch, got to Islamabad and undergoes that. I want to ask you about that. And the other thing is this weird, like, not weird, but like every couple chapters, or every 7 chapters, we get a update on what's the code name for Osama bin Laden. Crankshaft.
Oh, Crankshaft, right. Crankshaft is the operation.
The operation.
Right. The operation to take him down.
We get this up every now and then. We get this update.
It's just looming.
Crankshaft. And it's like, okay, I realize, and to my understanding, I guess this makes perfect sense, right? There's missions that go on. He's obviously placing it during this time period, so that makes sense that there would also be this other mission going on that the president would also want to know about. So We're going to try to merge the two together. So I'm really intrigued. Well, obviously we just heard from the president that he wants Mitch to be there to verify. Right. So that we've already learned how these two missions are going to come together. But, I don't see how it's going to happen.
No, I agree. The bin Laden stuff through the first half of this book is like the outlier. It's kind of looming out there, and it was a little abrupt when Irene brought that up with the president, because I thought the big thing she's nervous about talking to him about is sending Mitch on this mission that he's on.
Yeah.
And what he's
doing. But no, she goes and talks about Crankshaft.
But then she brings up Crankshaft, and she really is worried about that. I think that shows what the director has on her plate. Sometimes she might be the only one who knows all the different pieces and everything's compartmentalized, but she's like that sieve that it all has to come through. So I think that lends credence to her job. And then the other thing is that makes a really, really big deal about the Iranians giving the Afghanis technology to shoot down choppers at night. Like, that, dude, that I didn't think of that. I wasn't sure how the Bin Laden raid would come into this and why it's important. And it seemed weird when Irene talked about it. But dude, that whole operation is fucked if they can shoot down our choppers in the middle of the night.
Exactly.
That's the link.
Exactly. Yeah.
And if Ashani can give us intel that helps us stop that and stop that technology trade, Crankshaft can be successful. Wow. Don is a genius.
Yeah. And to me, it's almost like, all right, we read these stories and the way the authors craft them, we want to think that, oh, whatever is going on within this universe, that's what's most important. But what Don is doing here is placing us back in 2011. Of course, top of mind on the director of the CIA would be, capturing Osama bin Laden, especially because they have all that information about Abbottabad and about, the vaccine campaign. And so to me, it's just nice that you would throw that in, because you could easily just make a book where none of that is present at all. But then you're
you write it your own way.
But then you're reading, you're like, oh, well, at this time, that's when the CIA is also trying to capture Osama bin Laden. So what the hell is going on with that? So, it's nice to put that in an accurate historical context. And I feel like Don does a good job of that.
And two little nuggets there. You mentioned it, the hepatitis B vaccine, where they tried to knock on the door and get a blood sample. Well, that fails here in the book. So it's like the CIA tried something, didn't work. Well, I think it was successful in real life.
That's what it was successful in real life. I'm pretty sure.
And the other one that I think was realistic, when they're talking about the one courier who has been so good at using burner phones and tracking his movements. And he sometimes drives 90 miles, right, just to place a call on a burner phone. But he used the same internet cafe and sent some emails. And I think that might have been real, that courier kind of showed his cards, blown his cover when he did that. He was so careful on everything else, but that one opportunity let us get some intel. And I really like the call. By the way, we have one other thing I want to talk about is callbacks here. We get the callback with Barbara Lonsdale.
Yeah.
When both Irene and the president kind of know in the back of their minds, we can't have another failure, because our support on Capitol Hill right now is coming from both sides. Like, she switched, she went across the aisle after extreme measures to be pro-CIA, and she's helping things on the Hill get operations like this approved. And then our Chinook goes down. And then we had missing intel that the Iranians can shoot down our choppers. Like, this is going to look really bad, not only on Irene's leadership at the CIA, but look bad on our whole involvement in the Middle East. And if we can't get the senators on Capitol Hill to play ball, that could look really bad for the president. And that's going to make him, we're dead in the water. That's going to make him not greenlight ops like Crankshaft to go get bin Laden. So they know very well there's a lot riding on this. And that really ups the stakes at the same time as it connects to extreme measures and pursuit of honor. I thought really cool connection there. Memorial Day, I feel like, is mentioned, like the legend of Rapp and what he did to stop the nuke that day. Some of the operators are like, oh, it's that guy, or the SEAL Team 6 guy that Scott Coleman is talking to. He's like the SEAL Team 6 liaison with the Jalalabad group. I just think there's a lot of callbacks that Don gets right, but I didn't want to get off track there.
No, there's a lot of good callbacks, and I feel like also he's able to intertwine. I think I picked up 4 previous novels he directly says, including Capture or Kill. He says Capture or Kill, Extreme Measures, Active Treason.
This is Capture or Kill.
No, I know, but he's able to work
Oh, he used the phrase capture.
He uses the phrase capture or kill, but he also uses extreme measures, act of treason. Like, he. I don't know if by purpose or just because the nature of these novels, like the titles are the same. I feel like I read 5 or 7 of the titles of these previous books in his dialogue or in his words.
That's really fun. And some of them, even if not the title, I didn't pick up on that completely, but just referencing the storylines in ways that seem authentic and it's not forced. Like there's one point where he talks about what Rapp did in Paris after getting shot, and it just showed, he was the man for the job, and like that raised him to legendary status. Kill shot, that he got.
Talks about when he gave himself up to the Hezbollah to be captured to rescue Stan Hurley in the American Assassin.
Yeah, I think there's like you said 7 or 8 books referenced.
It's hitting all the hallmarks of like, all right, this guy knows his shit. I feel like, but not being too
preachy.
Yeah, like not hitting you over the head with it. It all worked. It wasn't like too much, if that makes sense.
I completely agree. The one thing maybe that was downplayed, and I don't mind it, but it was very Vince Flynn. You need the 1 to 2 pages about the Pan Am Lockerbie flight, about Maureen the That was short. About why it was only like maybe 2 or 3 sentences or like a paragraph.
Yeah, but he had it in there.
He had it. That's why I can't ding him too much. But Vince Flynn would put that full page. And I think sometimes it was the same exact text. I think Vince copied and pasted it sometimes.
It was almost, and I picked up on this. Brad does the exact same thing with some of the elements of Scott Harvath. It's just, you wrote something great one time.
You use it.
You might as well use it again, especially because these authors want them to be standalone novels.
So you could fill it in for new readers.
I think this novel, because of the nature of where it's placed, is really cool for not only being a standalone, but also super cool for being a lifelong reader because 100%. Of the elements of the connections that it makes with everything. And even like what we've mentioned, how it's so far, just from the first 200 pages, potentially connecting to Kyle's writing and like his storyline. So
I 100% agree. This is crazy to think. This is one of the better books to meet Mitch Rapp, to be introduced to Mitch Rapp. Like, there are some books I would tell people like, oh, don't read that one because you got to read these 3 first. Don't read that one. You don't want to know what happens, Or this one, you really get a feel for who Mitch Rapp is, so you got to start with this one. I could recommend this one to anybody because it's got that hook. You'll be drawn into it so much, you have to go back.
You'd want to read other novels. Yeah.
You want to read other novels. You want to know who Mitch is. Like, I mean, just look at this. This little sentence blew my mind when I read it because I was like, this dude's a motherfucking badass. And if you knew nothing about Mitch Rapp, but you just read this was right when the ambush happens that was staged by Coleman and Will Bentley, which there is a Will Bentley here, Force Recon Marine, new guy worker. He's got to die, right? Because where is he?
Like, he's not anywhere, so he's got to die, right?
Like Scott Coleman's got to lose him, or he's got to leave the Coleman team for some reason. But anyway, he's a fun character. Right before that op wraps up and Rapp goes out into the jungle, with an utterance that sounded more like a growl than speech, Rapp dropped his rifle, lifted the warlord into a fireman's carry, and ran for the trail. That's just such a cool way to end that ambush scene. Rapp picking up this warlord on his back after he convinced him they're on the same team and just running off into a trail to go find a nearby village after the staged ambush. And then the president and the security council are watching that on film and they know it's a CIA guy, but don't know it's Rapp. If I never knew anything about Rapp, just that one sequence would make me want to read everything about this guy.
Same. Dude, like I said, I had my trepidations. Not because of Don, just because of like a new writer, Sure. Obviously, this is a series that's near and dear to my heart, but I don't know. Through the first 200 pages, I think he's done a damn good job, and I'm vested and I'm excited about reading the second half of this book because I really want to know what happens.
100%. My 3 biggest concerns. 1, the transition to a new author. Check. No longer a concern at all. 2nd, going back in the timeline to protect and defend, filling in gaps between Vince's stories. Check. No longer a concern at all. Doing this semi-alternate history, as we called it, with the Bin Laden stuff.
That's still up for grabs.
Still up for grabs. Undecided. Yeah. Undecided. Yeah. If that
we have to finish the novel to pull off that one.
Right. And then the other undecided is, does this fit with the canon of the other books around it, or does it break the lore? So far, no indicators that will happen. So, undecided, though, until we read it.
One last thing before we wrap up part 1. What did you think of the rescue of the Ranger at the end with Scott and team, and the fact that there's this like other Iranian who like outs Mitch and says, "Oh no, he's the angel of death. What are you doing?" Like, dude. And then the guy can't swim. I thought it was great.
Oh my God. That sequence just hummed. The second I just read that fireman's carry where he takes the warlord, I think Cyclone, on his back, all the way up until
leaving from the fake ambush.
The waterfall.
Yeah.
Leaving from the fake ambush, which I just read about, all the way up to Scott Coleman coming in and saving them in the waterfall in the pond, the river. That entire sequence blew my mind. It was a mix. God, there's so much happening there. It was a mix of the opening scene in Memorial Day, which was that huge military engagement. It was a mix of Lethal Agent in the cave complex with, what's his name? Mukhtar? Was that Imad Mukhtar?
Yeah, Imad Mukhtar.
So we got the cave elements of that. It's also him undercover. That one time, like you said, he goes undercover, lets himself get captured. He's using an alias. He's pretending to be the warlord. He's using all his features, right? His darkened features, his Iraqi accent, and perfect understanding of the Arabic language. He's firing on all cylinders as Mitch Rapp in that sequence. 2 quibbles about it, though. When Sexton, the Marine that they rescue, or is he a Ranger? He's the Ranger that they rescue. When he can't swim, I was like, give me a break. Like, yes, it led to the banter of SEALs are good in the water, Rangers are good on land. It's not part of their.
He does say he joined the Army, not the Navy. So,
you could write it off. It leads to that little bit of banter. So, sure, you got me. I'm okay with it. But come on, it's kind of a cheap little device to up the stakes and just make this exciting. I wouldn't have minded if you condensed that all and it was just, there's a stream here. Let's jump into it and go get saved. Oh shit, they're shooting at us and we almost died in the waterfall. Thank God Scott Coleman's here, and thank God these smoke, artillery smoke, white phosphorus grenades are going off and whatever. You could have just done that instead of stretching it out with the I can't swim, because that was not a good buy-in. I was just checked out of the. You could have just made it. It's really hard carrying this guy because they're trying to take one of the guys for intel so they can debrief him and interrogate him. You could have just made that the challenge instead of the not swimming. So it was lighthearted. The other quibble, a little long when the lights are out in the cave, right after he turns around, tries to kill the Iranian guy who we assume maybe he's not just a warlord there, but he also might be the guy who had intel about selling the technology to shoot down the choppers. He escapes out of the cave. The cave sequence and shootouts and getting lost in the tunnels got a little long in the tooth. So I loved everything about Rapp going undercover as Farid Saeed, having to convince Cyclone to trust him, having to turn on the Iranian guy, the meat to buy the American, how he's going to free the hostage. I wasn't sure if that would be a little cheap of how he's going to free the hostage, but then Cyclone offers it to him as a business proposal. And Farid's like, I'm well equipped. I've moved people across the border before because I work in all these shady, murky dealings across the border. I would definitely believe that Farid Saeed has business with this guy and would want to purchase him. So this like highest bidder scene I really liked. My quibbles are it went a little long in the tooth in the cave and a little unbelievable with the I can't swim plot. Just seemed a little cheap.
Yeah. I liked how a lot of those chapters, so from when that scene starts to when we're ending our talk today, is like 25 chapters, but it's only 100 pages of the book.
Yeah, it's a long sequence.
And there's a lot of like 1 to 3 page chapters. It's like
some of them are short. Yeah.
Some of them are very short and some of them are very long. It's just, I like the mix mixing up of the writing style of the there's some staccato-ness with the chapters, and then you get a long one. So he's doing all the beats that we've seen with not only his writing, but with, how some of these thriller writers are going nowadays, like with the Brad, with the James Reese, Jack Carr. So, dude, I love it. You said it might crack the top 10. I think I have to agree. It might crack the top 10.
I think it might crack the top 10 pretty comfortably if the second half is like this first half. Yeah. Another thing that was super cool during that whole sequence, Rapp pissing on the dude, and that's the signal for the drone to be able to pick up on their location. Yo,
that was crazy.
When Rapp starts pissing on the guy, I'm like, oh, this is brilliant to make the guy think he's really one of them. The fact that he'd be willing to do this. But no, I was sold and I was tricked because there was more to it than that. Oh, I love that. And the threads on his shirt was kind of cool. When Coleman, during the ambush operation, he can't get shot. He has these IR threads in his shirt that only the IR and the night vision goggles would pick up. So he'd light up very different than the colors of the other bodies. Two really cool little nuggets that were elevated for me. And oh man, the pissing on the dude was just fantastic.
Well, I even like the fact that they staged this entire ambush only to place a gun that had, instead of ammunition, it had like a pink capsule on the end, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But you got to imagine that, all right, is that going to be the only gun around? Is Rapp going to know to pick up that? How are they going to signal to Rapp to pick up that one and fire it at this Will Bentley guy?
It's dangerous.
Super dangerous, but cool. And the fact that we get thrusts, the way Don writes that sequence, we don't know what's happening. We cut from one scene to the other.
Yeah.
That's more of a Don style
than
a Vince style. Right?
I think that's Vince. I don't know. I think that's Vince? Kind of Vince. I think it's a little Vince to do something where you're not exactly sure what's going on. I don't know if I have an example of it. I feel like maybe Hank Clark walking into the country club. You get this whole thing if he's talking to his buddy, he's having lunch or whatever. But then a few scenes later, Rapp's going to be waiting in the sauna for him.
Yeah,
you thought this was a safe space. You thought like he just had lunch with his buddies. He did all his scheming. He played golf. But then Rapp's there, or term limits.
Term limits. I was thinking about term limits a lot with this.
Dude, Seamus watching the choppers take off from the White House. I think he's in Arlington Cemetery at the Lee House, so he has perfect view of this. And you don't know what's going on with the choppers and all. But then it's the president going out to Camp David and no, term limits with, this is a throwback. Do you remember he had to put the jamming devices in the newspaper dispensers?
Yes.
To jam up the media vans,
yes.
So that their feed was all messed up, so that I forget exactly what. That was the jammers, so the choppers would have to go over the Potomac River. Yeah. I feel like we as the audience didn't exactly know what was going on. Scott Coleman drugging the dog. He comes up with poison laced meat, and he drugs the dog in the alley in the backyard under cover of like a utility cable man. We don't know why. But then that's because he's going into the house later and he doesn't want the dogs to come on. I just think I saw a little bit of Vince in that with that, not quite a misdirect, but the audience doesn't have the full picture of where we're headed. And then when it happens, it's so exciting.
Okay.
I could probably find more, but those ones just come to mind.
Dude, I'm excited about the first half. Next time we talk, we'll talk part 2, man.
Yeah, this book did a lot more than I was expecting it to do. It exceeded expectations thus far.
Very much so.
Yeah.
It'll be live from not live, but recorded from, I'll be in Amsterdam when we record part 2 of this book. Hopefully, Mike will not have to have a rush to the hospital. But before then, we got to thank our patrons, including our Deputy Director, Sherry F., our Special Operator, Jason C., our Special Agents, Ben, Daryl, Kevin, George, Matt, Dawn, Peggy, Mark, and Chris. please subscribe, rate, and review to all 3 seasons of the Mitch Rapp Pod. You can find us at thrillerpod.com or on Twitter and Instagram at thrillerpodcast. And as always, Jill said Mitch, be Mitch.